Hi guys, so for you, those who don't know me, my name is Caitlin, otherwise known as Compatibility Coach, and I am a life and a love coach, just going to slightly readjust this, who helps people and especially women build different relationships with themselves and others so they can transform how their relationships feel and especially their love life. This really is about creating a world where being single feels empowering rather than disappointing, dating is hopeful and fun, and relationships are healthy and committed. This is about ditching toxic relationship patterns and breaking the cycles we find ourselves in, including that being attracted to emotionally unavailable partners. So the reason I am running this YouTube video today on Attachment Styles 101 is because this comes up time and time again within my client work, because attachment theory and attachment tendencies tend to shape our romantic lives. And it has a huge impact on how we feel about ourselves, others, and also dating and building those healthy relationships we talked about. And this is also a request I get time and time again. So today we are going to be talking a little bit about an overview of the three different attachment types and kind of where perhaps rupture in attachment theory comes from and attachment tendency comes from. And we're then going to be talking a little bit about how this plays out in dating and some common patterns I see before going on to some dating tips. So I'm going to try and keep this video around 20 minutes. Slightly longer than I usually do, I've got to say, but there is so much to go through here and I want it to be really informative. So attachment theory started with John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, who looked at attachment tendencies within children. And John Bowlby noted that through evolutionary terms, we're genetically programmed to single out a few individuals to be close to, and we need to maintain connection and closeness to these figures at all cost because our survival depended on it. So, sometimes when we over-attach to people or we get super close super quickly and we feel like we're going crazy or obsessed or addicted to them, sometimes I think it helps to think about it in this context, because somebody like Bowlby would argue that it is a kind of evolutionary predisposition. Okay, so doesn't mean we're crazy or there's something wrong with us. It just means that from his stance, we do this because it means we get a better chance of survival. And usually this means it's kind of mum or the dad, or it's the caregiver. And later in life, it becomes the romantic partner. So our attachment system is the mechanism in our brain that's responsible for tracking and monitoring our closeness to these and the sort of availability of these attachment figures. So a really basic example from childhood is child get lost, child cries, mum or caregiver or dad comes back to child is safe. And in an adult example, this might look like your romantic partner withdraws, you call their phone 10 times a day, they pick up, connection is re-established. So we all have the same need for attachment and attention, but we tend to have developed different coping strategies from upbringing, but also life events. And, kind of people like Mary Ainsworth focus primarily on childhood attachment and says that when an infant experiences consistent attachment and his or her needs are met, you internalize three things, which is I'm safe, I'm heard, I'm valuable, which means we can then go on to form the kind of relationships that mirror this pattern, that you are safe, you are heard, you are valuable, and you will seek out partners who tend to give that to you and who kind of help you feel like that, because you're taught from a young age, indirectly or directly, that your needs are going to be met, that you are loved, you're valuable, that you are worthwhile, and that you will be supported and that people can be trusted. And Ainsworth argues that on the contrary, when a child perceives that his or her needs are not met, then they're perhaps not able to build that solid foundation, which can lead to a little bit of a distortion about how relationships work. So historic and general attachment theory has argued that attachment rupture or difficulties later on in life tend to stem from this childhood arena, and attachment rupture or attachment difficulties can come from things like loss of somebody close to you, any trauma, abandonment, neglect, enmeshment, which is no boundaries, lack of approval, attention, affirmation, affection, and then other factors such as kind of genetic temperament, traumatic birth experiences and things like that can also come out to play. Now, I would say as well that I think the theory of this has moved on slightly in that when we look at attachment theory now, we also acknowledge that changing in kind of attachment temperament or attachment tendency can happen later in life due to significant life events too, as I said, such as the relationships that we have, any sort of bullying at school, things like that, loss of somebody later in life. So there are lots of kind of different factors which can build perhaps and develop into the new attachment theory. And before I go on to talk about the 3 attachment tendencies that Mary Ainsworth argued that there were, I do want to say, when we're talking about this, and you perhaps might identify with one more than the other, I don't want us to start labeling ourselves in a very concrete way, and as a way to mean that you're stuck there, that it's not going to move, that it's not a little bit of fluidity. And just because you identify as one, it doesn't mean that then becomes your identity. So in fact, 1 of 4 people change their attachment style over a 4-year period without doing any work. And it's just a bit of a way to build your awareness around your own patterns, to explore what could be going on. And it doesn't also mean that it's an excuse to act in a certain way, because this is your tendency, this is what you do. This is a tool to build awareness, to help shape those relationships. And what I tend to do with clients is work with them very specifically to move them towards a little bit more of a secure attachment. So our coping mechanisms that we've built up through various stages of our life, and especially childhood, tend to form into 4 categories, which are avoidant, anxious, secure, and fearful avoidant. And Mary Ainsworth argues that 25% of the population are secure, 25% are anxious, 20% are avoidant, and about 5% are that fearful avoidant. And what we're really going to be focusing on today is the first 3, and which are the secure, the anxious, and the avoidant tendencies. And then we're going to be talking about a really common pattern and dance we see between them, and what this can mean for our love life and dating, and how to slightly then begin to shift it. So let's start with the secure attachment style. Did I say secure is 25%? Secure is 50%. Sorry, my math on that was terrible. Secure is 50% of the population, not 25%. So secure attachment, let's say, starts from that classic example that we mentioned earlier, where you expect to have your needs met because that's what you've been taught. You expect to be loved in return. You expect to feel safe in a relationship, and you feel valid and safe and heard. Okay. And this means if somebody doesn't treat us well, we don't internalize it. We tend not to. And we think, oh, there's something wrong with me. We think, oh, okay, they can't meet our needs. I don't want to be in this relationship. Because it's not an issue with your worth, it's perhaps an issue with them. So as a general rule, you tend to be quite reliable, trustworthy, open to communication. You don't play games, because why would you? What's the point? You expect to meet somebody and have a great relationship. So you tend to kind of perhaps avoid or be able to diffuse drama when it comes up, and you tend to respond rather than react to things. So you are consistent, and you're quite comfortable with intimacy, and you don't tend to run away when people get too close. You accept your responsibility in relationships, and you're happy to accept your partner's flaws as well as your own, and give them space or reassure them when it's needed. So as a general rule, this can sometimes feel like the holy grail of relationships, but actually it's not. It's something that we can work towards, and that some people tend to, sort of lean towards more automatically. But it is just about accepting that you have your needs, other people have theirs, and you want to create a loving and nurturing environment where you both feel safe and you both feel heard, okay? And what I would say with this as well is, just because you have a tendency to have a secure attachment, what we sometimes do is we hold people up as this holy grail. We put them on this pedestal, and we think that dating a secure person is going to solve all of our needs and anxiety and, whatever. And, we also need to acknowledge that because you have a secure attachment doesn't sometimes mean you don't feel insecure. It doesn't sometimes mean you don't get anxious. It doesn't sometimes mean, you react in the wrong way. You're still human. It's just a tendency that you tend to lean towards. I feel like I'm saying tend a lot here. And what I will say as well is, if you come from a place of anxiety or avoidance, which we're going to talk about now, when you date somebody that feels quite secure, it can feel a little bit calm. It can feel sometimes a bit boring because you know what's coming. There's not that guessing, there's not the games, there's not the back and forth. So it's also something to look out for, because we say we want the secure partner, but sometimes if we are dating them or romantically involved with them, it can feel very, very different. And we sometimes tend to write them off as having no spark, which is something my clients do a lot. So onto the second attachment style, which is the 25%, and this tends to be the anxious attachment style. Now, this, I'd say, is something that my clients struggle with a lot. And it can sometimes feel like we're too needy, we're too crazy, we're too much. It can feel like we're very obsessed, we're almost addicted to the romantic partner. So if you have an anxious attachment system, you have a very activated system, which means you're usually on hyper alert, looking for signs that your relationship is being threatened. So on one hand, it means you're incredibly empathetic, you're very sensitive towards other people's needs, you're very intuitive, but it means sometimes that you're living in your body in that state of adrenaline because you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're on that alert, okay, they've stepped back, they're not responding in the same way. I had one client who got out of a very regulated pattern because their partner didn't actually respond with emojis when they usually would. So you're on the lookout for those little signs. And you interpret a lot of people losing interest in you because you were taught somewhere along the line that you might be left and your needs weren't valid. So you're going to work harder in a relationship to prove your worth, to prove that you're worth loving. You will fight a lot more for that, and you have a tendency to step towards the person, to step into the space. When you are activated, when you have a sign that your partner might be stepping away, your instinct is that you want to bring them closer to you. And when this happens, you are kind of flooded with something that's called activating strategies, which are thoughts that compel you to bring this person closer. So that child in the supermarket crying to bring their caregiver back, your brain will go on to overdrive. So all you can think about is them. And if you're seeing somebody, there is so much pressure on this relationship to work out because it feels like your survival depends on it. I don't know any of you resonate with that, but sometimes the person can become a lot bigger in your head than the situation necessarily warrants. And because you're always waiting and thinking about them, and sometimes thinking that they're the only one that you're going to find like this, and they're the only one who is perhaps good enough, or you know, what can you do to make them commit, then that distortion can lead to a little bit of panic, because the underlying fear is that you might be abandoned by them. So that then leads to something called protest behavior. So in adults, protest behavior, rather than the kid crying in the supermarket, can look like we go to extreme methods to establish that connection, that closeness. So that could be, you know, I guess in modern day and age, excessive calling, stalking on social media, constantly posting things to get their attention, or it can be playing games where you step back, you threaten to leave, you go, you say it's over to try and provoke a response. It can be, you know, sort of cancelling plans, threatening to end the relationship, as I've just said, keeping score. All of those things, you are basically trying to provoke a reaction, and even if it's the wrong reaction, it's a reaction which makes you feel closer. So you're always trying to re-establish that contact and that context. And this can make us feel sometimes like we're going crazy, that, you know, can make us feel like an alien's taken over our body, especially if we rarely meet anybody we like. It can become, you know, incredibly all-encompassing. So I'm gonna say you can ask questions at the end of the video, but I was going to say, obviously, if you've got any comments, please write them in the box. I would then say we look at avoidant attachment style, which is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, or the other side of the coin, as I like to say. So if you're avoidant, perhaps you learn along the way that your needs aren't going to be met, your emotional needs aren't going to be met, and that can cause you to withdraw and always need to protect your space emotionally and physically, because you don't trust that somebody else is going to be able to meet you there. So perhaps as a child, it could have been that your parents were available to you, but they were perhaps emotionally unavailable. They weren't there to meet your emotional needs. You know, you were told to be quiet, don't think about that, don't do that, you know, and your sort of needs in that sense were shut down quite a lot. So you, as an adult, you tend to bottle things up and avoid closeness. So when you have a little bit of an avoidant tendency, which some common characteristics can tend to look like you send mixed signals, you tend to focus on what's wrong with your partner rather than what's right, or you perhaps fantasize about being happy with somebody else, or you have a bit of an unrealistic expectation of what a romantic partner looks like and feels like, so nobody quite measures up because you're searching for the one, or you have that ex that you compare everybody to. Don't know if people are resonating with this, or you there's something that always stops you from committing. You know, you're looking for that 5% better, right? There's always something that's going to be better out there. So these things, these characteristics, are a way to prevent you from getting too close to somebody. And they're called the activating strategies. So, well, with anxious, you have activating, so you're trying to find ways to get closer to them, emotionally and physically, mentally. When you're avoidant, you're doing the opposite. So you're stepping back, okay? And it's all about regaining your space and your independence. So you tend to value freedom over connection. But don't forget, you still do have the same need for attachment and for closeness, but because of what happened to us, we have different protective instincts. So your protective instinct is to step back, whereas somebody with a slightly anxious side tends to step forward, okay? So when we think about these two characteristics, and we're perhaps going on to the sort of second section, which is really, how does this play out in a dating sphere, doesn't it? I already know I'm over 20 minutes, so we're fine with this. I'll just keep going. As a general rule, anxious and avoidant tendencies tend to be attracted to each other, and there's this little dance between them because they tend to reconfirm each other's underlying beliefs. So when you're an avoidant person and you're dating an anxious person, because the anxious person wants to step forward into the space, be very close, know what you're doing, want to emotionally connect, they're kind of watching you for signs that something isn't right, you will think that they're trying to impinge on your independence, and that, yep, you were right about relationships, they're too much, people want to get too close, they don't respect what you need, they don't respect your space, so you will then step back. Anxious people as well will have and when that avoidant person steps back, for the anxious person, the underlying fear, remember, is that they're going to be left. So their beliefs are also confirmed when that person goes. So it's this dance, and it becomes quite an addictive pattern, because it is all about the adrenaline, the chase. You don't know what's happening, you don't know what's going on. And for what I see with clients who are quite anxious is that it's very about the push and pull. There are lots of highs and lows. You're always on this emotional roller coaster. So it feels very exciting and it's very high adrenaline. And we tend to mistake that for chemistry, because that's what we think the spark is. So when you're dating somebody, as I said earlier, who is a little bit more secure, who's a bit more calm, what happens is it's boring, because there's not those spikes, compared to when you're dating the avoidant person who isn't really available, who you don't know what's going on. That's very, very attractive, and that feels familiar. You're used to that dance, you're used to that pattern. So that's what we're drawn to. Because sometimes stability feels boring if we're not used to it. And for an avoidant person, somebody who's there, who's pretty stable, who's going to say, yeah, okay, if you want a bit of space, you have a bit of space. There's not sort of glue that holds it together. And what I would say as well is, with an avoidant tendency, you do sometimes yearn to be emotionally connected, but you don't quite know how to get there, and you look at blaming the other person. And with an anxious person, you also yearn to be emotionally connected, but you perhaps don't know how to regulate enough to support your own needs first and foremost, without looking outside a partner. So it's just about what we've learned that love feels like and love is, and how we've protected ourselves growing so far. So there's no right or wrong here, guys. They're just tendencies. And as I said, this is something we can move towards having a bit more of a secure attachment style. And what I would say as well, when we tend to date people who are the, who are on the other side of the coin to us, whether we're anxious or avoidant, is that sometimes the characteristics in the other person are, you admire. So somebody with an anxious tendency might admire the fact that the avoidant seems strong, seems together, knows where they're going, knows what they're doing, very driven, seems quite emotionally stable, because they don't have the anxiety or the highs and the lows that you might be used to. And again, for somebody who's a bit more avoidant, might tend to think, okay, somebody with an anxious person's really emotionally intuitive. They're empathetic, they're kind, they're warm, they can talk about their feelings, and kind of admire that too. So yeah, as I said, I think the last thing I would leave this on when we're talking about that is that as I said, we tend to get quite caught up in the which one am I, what's going on, what box do I fit into. And actually, if you look at the kind of sorry about that, had a technical glitch. If you look at the recent theory now, what you will see is a lot more kind of practitioners saying that, we kind of have the label of secure, and then underneath that is insecure. So there is actually a little bit more fluidity between the anxious and avoidant style, and the anxious and avoidant tendency, which makes a lot of sense, because I've definitely been in this situation, quite a few years ago, where with the available guys, I was avoidant, and with the unavailable guys, I was anxious. So I do think it's, two sides of the same coin. And there is a lovely question that you can ask yourself from a coach called Sylvie Cushin, who says, when you're not sure about kind of where you are on the scale, ask yourself if you're afraid of being overwhelmed by connection, or if you're afraid of losing connection, and it will tell you where you're coming from, which I really like, because it means then actually you can put things in place to be able to regulate yourself and regulate your emotions. So let's go on to the third section now, which is to talk about, okay, if we resonate with one of the attachment tendencies a little bit more, what does that mean for dating? And I'm going to focus on the anxious and avoidant tendency here, because that is the one that probably needs a little bit more work, either not to run away from that connection or to learn to self-regulate and sometimes step back from that connection. So first of all, for somebody with the anxious side of things, we tend to have a little bit of a lack mindset when it comes to dating and relationships, because we live in the kind of fear or this sort of distortion that there's nobody out there who's going to sort of love us and want to stay with us. So we need to go into dating with a completely new mindset, that there are a lot of people out there who are going to meet your needs. It's the plenty of fish mindset, and you expect to be treated with dignity and respect and love. I think on the anxious side of things as well, you also need to learn to self-regulate rather than react and panic. And this is something that takes a lot of kind of little steps to do. It's about really getting to know yourself, getting to know your body, getting to know your triggers, and everything like that. Then if we look at kind of this is a tip for both of, anybody basically, is you have to learn to communicate. If you're anxious, you have to learn to communicate what you're feeling and what's going on. And if you're avoidant, you have to learn to communicate your need for space and respect the other person's feelings as well as your own, and be able to explain that, and ask for what you need, and trusting that other people are going to meet you there rather than just withdrawing or blaming on someone else. And I would say as well, if you tend to find yourself stuck in the anxious avoidant loop, you need to look at what your love and dating patterns are and look at your blueprint around that, because that is a cycle that we would need to break, so you can learn to kind of have that healthier relationship. And last one, I think this is a little bit more for avoidant, is pay attention to your feelings when you do start to feel yourself pull away. Practice after dates, after with somebody, looking for the positive. Sometimes I ask clients to write a list of 3 things they liked about the person, because it's about retraining your brain, okay, to actually think, okay, if I'm not deactivating, if I'm not trying to pull away, how can I appreciate this person? What can I do? So we learn to see it out and we learn to stay rather than walking away and assuming that somebody better is going to come along. So yeah, that's 5 dating tips for you around this style. If you would like more content on this subject, please do comment below. Please rate, follow and subscribe. Apologies for the technical glitch, and I will see you all very soon.